I'm Larry Weeks, and this is Bounce. Conversations about challenge, whether personal or corporate. I try to suss out the tools, tips, or systems that can help us handle them.
You know, when you find yourself at the bottom of a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. And stopping digging when the world rewards you for digging, that's counterintuitive, man. I have a client, a CEO, who's in January of 22, his board said, if you can find a light body, hire them. They hired 1,000 people from January to June. In June of 22, a $300 million debt facility was pulled out, and they turned around and fired 700 people. What are we doing to people? When we surface these subroutines, when we surface these belief systems, we unleash a certain kind of potential, a certain kind of energy that enables us to do the one thing that a leader must do every day: be creative.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. Today, my guest is Jerry Colonna. Jerry is a well-known executive coach, often referred to as a CEO whisperer. When you're going to lay off employees, tell them first. Don't just cut off their computers. Anyway, he is the co-founder of Reboot.io, an executive coaching and leadership development firm dedicated to the notion that better humans make better leaders. For nearly 20 years, he has used the knowledge gained as an investor, an executive, and a board member for more than 100 organizations to help entrepreneurs and others lead with humanity, resilience, and equanimity. Wow, that'd be a great tagline for the podcast. Prior to his career as a coach, Jerry was a partner with JPMorgan Partners, the private equity arm of JPMorgan Chase. Previously, he led New York City-based Flatiron Partners, which he founded in 1996 with partner Fred Wilson. Flatiron became one of the nation's most successful early-stage investment programs, and he is also the author of Reboot, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up, which is the touchstone for a conversation. There is something about Jerry. In 2017, Wired published a piece on Jerry titled, "This Man Makes Founders Cry." And in doing my prep work, reading about Jerry and listening to some other interviews, that comes up a lot. But I could see why. I don't know if it's the way, he looks at you or the way he talks. And I don't believe in auras by any means, but man, he has some sort of sympathetic energy field that's like a psychic hand on the shoulder. When I talked with Jerry, I had a monster of a cold bug I was dealing with, coupled with whatever coaching superpower Jerry has that turned this conversation into a coaching / psychotherapy session of sorts. For all of you in any state of upheaval, change, uncertainty, please listen. And not just for the really, really good advice that Jerry gives, but there's something beneficial about hearing this level of empathy in someone's voice, honestly. So give this a listen. I think you'll understand. This is part one. We had to split up the conversation because we kind of went over. So on this episode, we talk about the state of leadership currently. There's a lot of upheaval in the market, especially out in Silicon Valley with SVB and you name it. And then we've got inflation, but there's been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry specifically. And there's just a lot. And Jerry coaches a lot of these very high-level leaders for a wide variety of firms, but a lot of them also are in the Valley. So we talk about that. We talk about why Jerry has a reputation for making people cry. We talk about his story, how he left JPMorgan and wound up doing what he's doing now. We talk about how leaders can deal with uncertainty in business, the importance and maybe the primacy of soft skills versus hard skills. We have a discussion about, can you separate genius from personality quirks? We talk about breaking open versus shutting down. He has a phrase, being sponged out. What rebooting means. What do you do if you're in a period of upheaval? And specifically, we address layoffs. So when you're first laid off, what do you do first, second, and third? And we talk about the analogy of being a mountain and work as an opportunity to become better humans, which I think is a great goal. So if you're going through any kind of work situation that has a lot of change involved in it and who isn't, give this a listen. I think you'll get a lot out of it. So without further ado, here's Jerry. Thank you for coming on, Jerry.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to ask for forgiveness. I'm just getting over a cold. I'm much better.
Very sexy.
How you doing? Oh, yeah, baby. If I seem spacey or I start coughing, just give me a second. But
that's all right. I'll probably end up coaching you then. Tell me about your father. No.
I am your father. I have the voice for the. So I'm trying to prepare for our conversation. So I'm listening to you talk with Tim Ferriss, and you or he or somebody says you make people cry, or you're known for this, and honestly, so I'm listening and I'm at the gym. I'm working out. Swear to God, Jerry, I'm listening, and this story is dovetailing into something I'm identifying with. I'm crying at the gym, and I have to stop and pause and it was actually, it was good, but I thought it was humorous about the crying thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a note. I'm going to mention this. I don't know why I'm telling you this, Jerry, because you're a coach. Because you're like a bartender. It's like,
it's my pheromones. They show up even through Zoom, don't they?
Jerry, welcome to the show. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I've poured out my heart here already early on. I wasn't going to do that, but I said, you know what? I just felt that's what I should do. So anyway.
It's the currency of connection, isn't it?
Ooh,
it's like shared feelings. I think that's what you were getting to, is that in this, dare I say, second half of life, we start to become real adults and we start to realize what matters. And what matters is, at the risk of sounding like an airline magazine ad for those inspirational posters, but hang on, baby, Friday's coming. But at the risk of that, we start to realize that really what we're all yearning for, right, is a sense of, as I wrote in my first book, Reboot, love, safety, and belonging. And sometimes we translate the wish for safety into a wish for money. Symbolically, I spoke about lemon drops as a boy being a symbol of having enough. But really what we want is to love and be loved, and to know to whom and to where we belong, so that we can feel safe and we can put our head down at the pillow at night and just sigh. I think this is universal. I think this is the human condition.
So I think we all have moments, but your story is, in your 30s, and Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was you were working in, was it investment banking?
Venture capital.
Venture capital. And there was some crucible or some moment in your life where you pulled out of that and you kind of rebooted to use your, not only the book, but the name of your coaching company, executive leadership firm. But how did you wind up in coaching? And did you step off into the unknown when you left venture capital? Did you not know what you were going to do next? Did you leave without that knowing?
The short answer to your last few questions is yes. And yes, you've got the sort of facts right. I was 38. I was the co-founder of a successful venture capital firm in New York. And in 2001, it was the first, what came to be known as the dot-com crash. So it wasn't a fun time. And then, of course, there were the attacks on 9/11, which had an influence on me for sure, in a negative way, or ultimately in a positive way, meaning it caused me to stop what I was doing and re-examine things. But in hindsight, now, all these years later, 20, 22 years later, I can see it really as a classic hero's journey. It was a classic moment in that quest where our hero has hit a rock bottom. And for me, it was a culmination of As I've often said, where the inner me and the outer me were out of alignment, where the life I was leading was not within integrity with who I really was as a person. And to be clear, it was a confusing time because I was getting approbation for leading my life like that. I was getting affirmation. And what happened was that a lifelong relationship with depression, which was, I think, a manifestation of this crosswise with myself, came back. And the depression that I experienced when I was a teenager, which included a suicide attempt, came back again in my late 30s with the same kinds of suicidal feelings. Fortunately, I was in therapy at the time with a brilliant woman. And when I hit that nadir moment in that journey, rather than falling further and further in, I began a very slow climb out. And what I climbed out into was the rest of my life, which you see as a coach, and I just see as authentically me. The fact I coach because that's what I was put on this earth to do. I write. There's my second book right here. Here's the manuscript. I write because that's what I was put on this earth to do. I am this way even in our podcast, and we immediately start talking and all of a sudden you're feeling something deeper because that's what I was put on this earth to do.
And when you say that, that's what I was put on this earth to do, that was something that was emergent when you were started doing those things, or you always knew you wanted to do it and you fought it, and that's the depression.
No.
Don't want to.
No.
Yeah.
No, what it was that I was molding myself according to an adopted set of beliefs and principles about what did it mean to be a good person, a successful adult, an adult. And I was quite skilled at it. Just like as a kid, I could get A's in classes and come home at night and feel incredibly depressed, not really understanding what was going on. The discrepancy, the out of integrity with which I was leading my life was that people would say to me, my famous question that oftentimes makes people cry is, I simply ask, how are you? And it's kind of a joke at this point. It happens so frequently. But my answer to that question, how are you, was always fine. Didn't matter that I was suicidal. The answer to the question was, I was fine. Didn't matter that I was lost or confused or those things. I, like so many of us, was socialized to hide, to wear a mask, to present a pleasing front. And then I got rewarded for that. Yay, here's wealth. Yay, here are good grades. Yay, here's a promotion. And the more I got, the worse I felt. Right? I mean, that's the conundrum of a life crosswise with who we really are. You know, you could call this an early, precocious midlife crisis. It was certainly a midlife moment where the bullshit had to stop and the house of cards came crashing down. By the way, to be clear, I like the result, but I wouldn't wish this on anybody because it sucked. When I walked away from the venture capital business, to be clear, it wasn't like I heard some bell go off and they say, oh, you should be a coach. Okay, I'm going to leave and I'm going to do this. It was a multi-step process. The first step of which was, this thing that I'm doing doesn't work. And if I don't do anything else for the rest of my life, at least I'm not making myself feel worse.
It was a process of subtracting what wasn't working without adding to. You didn't know what to add. So you were like, okay, let me just eliminate.
Let me just stop.
Yeah.
You know, when you find yourself at the bottom of a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. And stopping digging When the world rewards you for digging, that's counterintuitive, man. When the world is saying, hey, look here, congratulations, we love you. And you say, yeah, but I don't love me.
Jerry, when I joined Google, after the wonder of it all, offices and the global travel, or there were some things that were absolutely fantastic. And the people, once that context kind of, you got inured to it, I was very unhappy. And that was so incongruent to my understanding. And you can't tell anybody who is going to understand that.
Who's going to question or understand that you could be at the world's greatest playground? I mean, I'm imagining you were at Google. When did you join? What year?
2013. In fact, I remember the first week I joined, the movie came out about, I can't remember the name of it now, or the interns were there, I mean, Google was at the apex of, everything it's known to be.
I like the fact that you take nothing away from the colleagues or from the experience. Yeah. It's not about that being bad, but I think incongruity is the right word. That was the word you used. It was not you, even though it may have been you at the start. You had the audacity as a human being to grow. And, we live in a society that perceives the pursuit of congruity within ourselves as some bizarre, perverse narcissism, when nothing is further from the truth.
What threw me in your story kind of resonated was like, why? How can I not be happy with this?
Well, how can I make you feel like there's something wrong with you because you're not happy? And there are slides in the office. What's wrong with me that I'm not happy?
I heard the platitudes. I think everybody has. Money can't buy you happiness. It's very trite.
Right.
Very trite. But at some point, it flashes red. This is what that means, Larry. You got all the money here. What is your ding, ding, ding? It may be at a certain level. I don't know.
In my book, Reboot, I liken it to being on the merry-go-round. And you and I are old enough to remember that one of the things was to grab the brass ring, right? That's what that phrase means, is that you're going around and round and you can win a prize if you can grab the ring while you're going around. So there I was with the fucking brass ring in my hand. And the prize was more emptiness. The prize was more hollowness. So what's wrong with me? Because I have everything that everybody tells me I should have wanted. And it doesn't feel right.
So I have some friends who just reached out to me at Google. They just got laid off. So I thought it'd be perfect to have you on for many reasons, but one being these people are rebooting and they're forced to reboot. It's a forced reboot here, right? To reflect and to look at this as an opportunity to say, okay, what do I really want? And once the emotion is settled a bit, I'm not at a 10 freaking out. I'm, maybe a 5. Right. Because, and I wrote this down, so I wanted to ask you about it, that you said, and I think it's a pinned tweet on your Twitter feed. When I was 38, I realized I was nothing I wanted to be. So I made the choice to hit the reboot button and live. I do what I do to remind others that they can choose their own lives. It's hard, but not complicated. It's that part, Jerry, I wanted to ask you about. Rebooting is hard, but it's not complicated. Okay, the hard part I get. How is it not complicated?
Because we know what it is that we need to do. We have to sponge ourselves out. D.H. Lawrence has this beautiful line, are you willing to be wiped out? Are you willing to be sponged out? We know what we need to do. We have to go back to the beginning. So when I say it's not complicated, I mean, it's not nuclear fusion. It's just really scary and really hard. What are some of the things that we have to do to your friends who've just lost their positions at Google? You have to grieve, because what's died is an identity, which we were socialized to believe was permanent and fixed and unchanging. I mean, you described it, there were Googlers, so they made it. And then all of a sudden they're groundless. Literally the rug pulled out from under them. Forget for a moment whether or not they're financially jeopardized. They feel existentially jeopardized. Who am I if I am not? It's like when I made the decision to walk away from venture capital, a very dear friend of mine who is an LP in our fund said, "What are you going to do? What if nobody calls you?" And I said, I would welcome that. I was so needing to be sponged out. I was done. That, for several years, friends have called it my hibernation period, where I went from always being busy and always having, I had at one point 27 board seats. My God, what's I doing? It's crazy. And so I don't mean to make light of the transition that your friends are going through. And it's not just ex-Googlers. I mean, there's so many folks right now who are paying the price of the drunken sailor years of the last 5 years, where we were just hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring without a real attention to the cost. I mean, I have a client, a CEO, who's in January of 22, his board said, if you can find a live body, hire them. They hired 1,000 people from January to June. In June of 22, a $300 million debt facility was pulled out, and they turned around and fired 700 people. What are we doing to people? These are their lives we're playing with. It feels Greek tragedy in proportion, where like the gods, the demigods are just playing with people's lives. So there's that. So what are your friends to do? Well, the first thing they have to do is sit still and feel the grief. One of my favorite poems is by David Wagner. He just passed away last year. It's called Lost. And the first line of which is, when you're lost in the woods, stand still. When you're lost in the woods, stand still. Now, he says that because how are we programmed? We're programmed to, I just lost my job, so let me get on what? LinkedIn and find a new job? Slow down. Now, I don't mean to make light of the situation, and I speak from a position of privilege where I have a little bit of extra money in the bank and I can make some choices like this. So I recognize that. But the existential scrambling, right? Maybe the grief is a means of teaching us the fallacy of tying our self-identity, our self-worth to a job, to a title, to a company. Maybe we need to reprogram ourselves and realize that we're humans before we're anything else. That's what the opportunity for this transition is for people.
And I'm emphasizing the word opportunity, to look at this as an opportunity. It certainly doesn't feel like it, I'm sure, for many people, but it's an opportunity. Reboot, reset, reflect. There's so many things you said that I wanted to comment on. So since you mentioned some of your clients or a client in the hiring, and I alluded to this data set that you have, I wanted to tap into what's happening now with leadership and to continue the barrage of stuff. Silicon Valley Bank went under. Now there's not a banking crisis per se as worry and fears, but there was a ton of venture-backed firms at that bank that I'm sure that scared the hell out of them. And there's just a lot of uncertainty going on right now. So is that what you're seeing in your practice when you're talking to these leaders and the challenges that they're facing? Is it around this uncertainty? Could we just label it that? Is it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. There is that uncertainty. And what I have been sharing, to me, I turn to elders and wise teachers for guidance, always. And, at the start of the pandemic, I reached into my library and pulled out a book by the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron called Comfortable with Uncertainty.
Yeah, that's
108 teachings. And I would read often from it to gatherings on Zoom. But I found myself reaching for that again in these last few weeks when it seems like we've had, shocks in the financial system, shocks in the technology industry, which, for most of the last 20 years always seem to be moving up and to the right. We're 1 year into a land war in Europe. A land war in Europe. My father's generation fought a war so that would never happen again. And here we are, right? And then this is going on. And one of the teachings that Pema has is she likens our experience in the world to the weather. And sometimes that experience is the inner landscape of our emotions, and oftentimes it's the outer landscape of our experiences. And the task she gives us is to sit like a mountain in the midst of a hurricane, and not rigid and fighting the weather, but sitting like a mountain in the hurricane means to allow the weather to move about you, knowing that your basic goodness as a person is unshakable, is as unshakable as a mountain. Off to my right is Long's Peak, part of the Rocky Mountains. Long's Peak doesn't give a shit about the price of Bitcoin. It doesn't care about the stock market. And it's been there for thousands of years, and it's going to be there for thousands of years. Whether or not there's a park around it, whatever that means. Can we sit like a mountain in the hurricane? For me, I made reference before to the thing that I was put on this earth to do. The thing I was put on this earth to do is to connect with other human beings. P.S. I'm not the only one. The thing I was put on this earth to do is unshakably true. That today it manifests in being a coach. Tomorrow it manifests, I've got my second book coming out. It manifests as me being a writer. It's manifested in me being a father, being a partner, but that's unshakably true. Me being the best possible human I can be is me being a mountain in the midst of a hurricane. Or the falsehood is that the weather is when the weather is calm. That's not normal. There's always weather. There's always clouds. There's always wind. There's always rain. That's the way it's supposed to be. We get fooled when Silicon Valley Bank goes down because we believe that Silicon Valley Bank is a permanent part of the landscape. What utter nonsense. And so we suffer and we get scared. We believe that we're going to get a job and it's going to be our job for the rest of our lives. And so we suffer. Impermanence.
That's the truth of it.
Is permanent. That is the truth of it. In my book, Reboot, I use the analogy of life on the roller coaster. And we think that our task is to be gritty enough to get really good at riding roller coasters. No, the real skill is not boarding the roller coaster in the first place. And what do I mean by the roller coaster? When we tie our sense of safety to an external force like a job, we are setting ourselves up to feel disappointment, to feel grief, to feel sadness, because everything is impermanent. I wish someone had built a religion about this about 4,000. Joking.
On the other side of it, by the way, the mountain thing I wanted to address because that's such a great analogy. Annika Harris has this meditation, this guided meditation, and she uses it with children, but it is fantastic. And she basically says, visualize yourself as a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You're a mountain. The trees are growing on you. Mm-hmm. The birds are singing in the trees. It snows. It rains. But you're a mountain. It doesn't bother you. I'm oversimplifying it, but man, it's fantastic. But I can say the best thing I did was leave Google. And it was the hardest thing in the world that I went. My father died. There are other things that are harder, but from a different aspect of myself, the bad that I thought was just nothing, in the sense that I couldn't be where I am right now or have the conversation with you about these things without going through that and letting that go. You use the analogy going to the back of the cave, right? You were talking about connection, and that keeps calling me. That keeps, things come up, and I see that. Why am I spending so much time talking to the waiter? Why am I talking to this strange person and having this conversation? I'm enjoying it, but I've never looked at the quilt, and said, oh, I like to connect. Why am I doing this podcast? Things like that. So I'm seeing this pattern emerge, and it's starting to form the picture for me. So
why do you question it?
Why do I question? Do I question it?
You said I do these things that I enjoy, and then I question, why am I talking to this stranger? Why question it?
I think once I've identified what it is I'm doing or enjoying, I don't now. I get it. I get
what might be an interesting inquiry process is to pay attention to part of your brain that says, Larry, what are you doing talking to that stranger? Because I have a feeling there's a belief system embedded in that.
Really? The questioning, there's a belief system in the questioning?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, sit with it. What does that voice ask? What does it think you're supposed to be doing? Should you be leaving the stranger alone, for example?
That's a good question. I don't know. And you're talking about the actual questioning. What is the voice? Where's that coming from?
That's right. Where is that voice? And whose voice is it?
That may be my dad's. That may be my dad's.
Well, say more about that.
Well, I've always said I had this great combination growing up of a mom, this flaming, feeling redhead mother, loving and emotional, and this rational, very intellectual father. So the two, my mom the emotional reasoning was writ large with her. What she felt was the truth, and then dad was this rational. So I appreciate. I have both aspects of that.
We all struggle with those things, but I'm imagining it may not be true, so I may be projecting. But sometimes when a voice like that starts to show up, there's a whole storyline that goes along with this. Like, Larry, what are you going to do for money? Larry, what are you going to do? Spend your whole day talking to strangers? Larry, come on, is that really a job?
You should be a coach, Jerry. You've got some intuition that's amazing. Too bad you're doing what you're doing.
So this is the kind of moment. See, it's really when we face this nadir moment, when we're trying to figure out what we're doing, sometimes, so first we're socialized to be in a particular way where we're not going to feel certain feelings. We're not going to feel the grief. We're going to move towards the light. Okay. And that's a danger signal for me. Moving towards the light oftentimes means leaving in the back, leaving in the backdrop, in the background, like a subroutine, running constantly, a belief system that is unexamined, that isn't questioned, that rational voice. Except that rational voice, which oftentimes in our society comes in the form of our fathers, belies a fear. And the fear is of the unknown. The fear is the uncertain. This is not mom versus dad, to be clear. It's not an oppositional voice.
Yeah, I don't see that. Yeah. But I wanted his approval more. My mom was unconditional. My mom was in fact, the worse you did, the more bracing she was. Dad.
Right.
Dad was worried.
Dad, you had to earn it.
Well, he was worried if I didn't
maintain. Yeah.
Then you're going to be lost forever, which there were times in my life I was. So I could see.
Right. So his rationality, which shaped you and even shapes you today when you find yourself contemplating moving towards joy. What if I spent my whole day just connecting with people? That's joy. The rationality comes in and says, let me have a rational conversation with Jerry to figure out what steps he took to make that happen. Let me have a rational conversation to figure out, right, your head is being blown open. Let me have a rational conversation so I can turn this into something that will quiet the dad who lives in my head.
Are we all still talking to ghosts or trying to please ghosts? It's just...
Yes. Larry, in my language, it's all subroutines. It's all technical debt. It's all just running beneath the surface. It's like, oh, we wrote this code 20 years ago and that's still fucking running?
We think it's a feature and it's a bug.
That's what I mean when I say we have to kind of start over. Now, here's the good news, okay? When you start to surface these things with your adult mindset, you get to make choices about what belief systems you want to operate. You get to change the subroutines. See, when you're 8, you learned a whole set of subroutines. One subroutine was mom, the woman, is emotional and unconditional in her love. Dad, the rational one, the provider, wasn't conditional in his love, but you had to earn it. You had to make sense to him. And you put these two things together and mazel tov, you became a successful adult. Thanks, mom and dad. That's great. We were talking about incongruity before. Then there's a moment in our life. Sometimes it's an external force that acts upon us. Mazel tov, you've been fired. Fuck me. Or sometimes it's an internal force. This life I'm leading is not for me anymore. Whatever it is, it's a force that acts upon you. And in that moment, we have a choice. Do I look back and re-examine things, surface up those subroutines by listening closely to all of the voices in our heads so that I can then consciously choose, how do I want to spend the next 40 years of my life? How do I want to spend those precious minutes? If I know that I want to spend my days in authentic, genuine connection with other human beings, I'm a clever human. I can craft a structure around that to make that happen. You want to go start a company? Go start a company. But put at the center of its business connection between human beings. You want to go be a firefighter? Be a firefighter. Put at the center of that experience connecting with other human beings. You want to be a lawyer, a doctor, teacher, a coach. That's just outward manifestation. That's just trappings. Replace the subroutine that says you better do X, Y, Z in order to get dad's pride, mom's unconditional love, or whatever it was. Replace that with a core that says, on the whole, I want to spend every day of my life in connection with other human beings. Genuine, authentic, real connection, or enabling that between other people.
This is gold, Jerry, gold. So what's great about that is that you can also replace, I'm going to do whatever it is as long as X is the dollar.
That's right.
Stop that model.
That's right.
What is it
what is the currency that you want to use to feed your soul? What is that currency?
It could be building software. It could be teaching, whatever, but, kind of figure that out. And God bless us, we're in a society where that's possible. Is this the crux of coaching for what you do at your company, and also the need out there? It is leaders come to you and executives come to you. It's usually these issues, you call them subroutines, that are manifesting in broken companies.
Usually what happens is people come to us, as I often say, they're looking for the how behind what I would refer to as the practical skills that are involved in their job. So how do I lead people? How do I scale a team? How do I build a company? How do I do this? And I drive them crazy because my response oftentimes is, well, tell me about your father. But what I'm trying to marry or trying to convey is that there is this inherent, as I was saying before, it's hard, not complicated. Oftentimes, and this is a central belief in all coaching, oftentimes the client actually has the answer themselves. They pretend they don't have the answer because the path to the answer is scary. Well, if I really live the life I want to live, then fill in the blank. Some awful thing I'd have to quit. I'd have to change my life. I was like, okay, so that's hard, but it's not complicated, as in I don't know. I believe that embedded in all those subroutines, if we understand that every subroutine is rooted around delivering love, safety, and belonging. So even your dad's rationality was a wish for you to be safe because he loved you. And he didn't want you to fall backwards down the staircase of life. That was his way of identifying who he was. It gave him purpose. It gave him meaning. When we surface these subroutines, when we surface these belief systems, we unleash a certain kind of potential, a certain kind of energy that enables us to do the one thing that a leader must do every day: be creative. You marry creativity with empathy, you'll attract the best talent. You attract the best talent and give them an incredible sandbox with or without slides in which to do the best work of their lives. Chances are pretty good you're going to quote unquote succeed, whatever success means. Because human beings want to be in community and they want to connect and they want to do things that are wonderful. They want to create magic. And they want to do that with other people. Even the introverts among us want to do that with other people.
I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and he's listening. I know you're listening. When Musk took over Twitter, the shit show that ensued on Twitter, which is not a great barometer for reality, but regardless. So talking about Elon Musk and management style, some things were visible that I'm not 100% there's 100% correlation between what was visible on Twitter and what was actually happening in the company. But it seemed really chaotic. And we had this discussion. I said, he can do what he's going to do and improve that platform without all this, circus and disregard it looked like disregard for people's lives. And he said, no, this is the process. And I'm like, well, he goes, look, he's developing product in real time. I said, I'm not against he can do that, the technical stuff in real time and show, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this bull through the china shop.
You're talking about being a bully.
Crash and burn. Exactly. And he goes, the bull through the china shop is what is going to make this happen. And we had this disagreement. And so then I've had these conversations, and you're perfect to have this conversation. I talked to somebody who interviewed him. And so Steve Jobs came up and other leaders who I've read that bio and either was or could be a jerk depending on the circumstances. And we all can be, right? But there seems to be a connection between, for some people, thinking you have to be this jerk, this personality to have this level of success. And so my question is the genius inextricably linked to the personality picadillos? I think you can take the genius away from the personality picadillos and do what you're going to do without the destruction in human capital. I hope my question, I'm sorry, I meandered, but
you're it's both a question and an observation. And I'll just cut to the chase and say, okay. I agree with you in this way. One of the great conundrums of the entire tech industry is that we idolize certain personality types. You could argue that there's a narcissistic streak in certain personality types.
And there's a pride in surviving being under that.
Yes.
I've done that. There's a pride in it. Hey, I survived.
Yeah. And so we link in a rather irrational and illogical way bad behavior with genius outcomes. And we assume that the two go hand in hand. And I say it's illogical because what we overlook are the things that you use the term peccadillos, the peccadillo wielding narcissistic style, enraging, toxic personality. We assume that they're the one responsible for all the genius. And the truth is, nobody builds a company by themselves. That's just silly. That's just so silly. right? Anybody who's been around any company knows that this is an iterative process, that everything is we stand on the shoulders of giants. Bob Metcalf just got an award, the Turing Award. Bob Metcalf was a genius, right? And he didn't do it by himself. Vince Cerf is a genius. He didn't do it by himself. Tim Berners-Lee was a genius. He didn't do it by himself. And none of them would claim that they've done it by themselves. Be wary of people who take on the mantle of, I did this myself. I don't know about you. I don't want to work with people like that. So the question is that inextricably linked? Of course not. The thing is, the genius that is not self-promoting doesn't get headlines. It doesn't get clicks. It just produces, I don't know, return on investment. Just look
at Tim Cook. Look at Tim Cook. Look at
Tim Cook. I mean, Steve Jobs was a freaking genius.
No doubt.
Question about it. And 90% of the people who want to emulate him don't have his genius and just want to emulate his bad personality traits. That's nuts.
And my question is, how high is high? We don't know. If you take, to me, those bad behaviors are governors. I just had this conversation again with my friend revisiting. I said, I'm going to talk to Jerry Colonna. I'm going to ask him, because I'm wondering the counterfactual we don't never know is that how many talented people for the next iteration of the product left that we'll never know.
That's right. There's no A/B testing going on this.
There's an emergent property of certain people. When they come together, boom, this genius shows up.
That's right. So, and look at if you want to use as a metric of value, and I'm suspicious of this, look at the value of Apple stock in the years since Steve is no longer involved.
That's amazing. It's amazing.
So
everybody thought that's it.
What are we talking about here? Satya Nadella has done a fantastic job at Microsoft, but he doesn't have to throw a phone at anybody.
You must talk to executives if you know they're throwing. I didn't even think of Microsoft. That's a perfect example. It's like,
remember
who would
when
have
we wrote Microsoft off for dead?
We wrote it up. Totally. Yeah.
Right. And I was like, okay, they're just sitting there making return on investment, making good cash flow returns, and building great products. Oh, that's all.
And I wonder
and they're
how
not destroying human beings in the process.
And you've probably seen success happen after one of your clients where some of these things were addressed. You didn't see a drop, he got his shit together with the company tanked. What did you do?
That's right. I think we have to have a part 2 of the conversation, whether or not you record it for a podcast.
Oh, that would be great.
And I think that if you want, we could have the conversation that really sort of you've been leaning into anyway.
I didn't.
And I think that would be lovely. If you haven't read Reboot, my book, read Reboot. That I think will answer a lot of the questions that you have about, tell me about your journey.
Okay.
And that one, you should have a box of tissues with you.
And there's another book I heard you recommend that I'm reading. Listen to Your Life Calling?
No, Let Your Life Speak.
Let Your Life Speak. That I'm just starting.
By Parker Palmer. Yeah.
Jerry, thank you for the conversation. This is fantastic. And
Larry, thank you. Honestly, we could have gone on for another 2 hours. So it just feels like part 2 is in the offing.
Yes. So I'm going to reach out to you immediately and try to schedule that. Thank you again.
Thank you for asking great questions, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.
Take care.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit larryweeks.com, and we will talk again soon.